Läuft doch alles.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Sheila Watson. I'm Deputy Director of the FIA Foundation, which is a UK-based philanthropy supporting work around the world on safe and sustainable mobility. I'm also co-chair of the UK and US government's Zero Emission Vehicle Task Force, that's the ZEVTC, International Assistance Task Force, that's the IAT, Country Programs and Partnerships Working Group, that's the CPBWG. So it's the CPPWG of the IAT of the ZEVTC. And there will be questions on that at the end from the panel to the audience. I'm delighted to chair this press event, which will be sharing a new report which has been undertaken by the team at University of California, Davis, which seeks to add valuable understanding to the work of the ZEV Transition Council, the ZEVTC, on the current needs of emerging and developing markets when it comes to vehicle electrification, which is the overall objective of the ZEVTC. I will leave our speakers, Pierpaolo Cazzola, who is Director of, and Maria Santos Alfageme, researcher at the European Transport and Energy Research Centre of University California, Davis, and the report authors, and Tim Dallmann, who is Interim Director of International Partnership Programme at ICCT and who heads up the ZEV Transition Council Secretariat. And they will elaborate on the study and they'll tell you a little bit about the background to the ZEV Transition Council too. But I just want to add one thing from the perspective of the foundation, which is that the underpinnings of the work are broad and will be explained to you. But one programme which has played a really large part in fueling our understanding on the issues faced in the Global South in relation to vehicle transformation, be that through electrification or improved efficiency, is the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, which is a partnership of 6 leading global organizations, including UC Davis and ICCT here, but many others. And I think there've been enough acronyms, so I won't go through them, but you can access GFEI online extremely easily. And that has offered real capacity building support in over 100 countries, 70 of them, as I said, low and middle income in the Global South, over a decade of work, of careful in-country work, developing fuel economy policy, helping to secure the transition towards zero carbon vehicles, which we need globally, but which is a genuinely different transition depending on where in the world you find yourself. So this work and the rich body of research and data work to track progress and relevant issues, which were also undertaken by GFEI, has really formed a vital underpinning to the research you're going to hear about now. And that's in part, at least, why the foundation is so very delighted to have been able to support this work and to be part of this conversation today. So over to our speakers. So after Maria and Pierpaolo and Tim have spoken, there will then be plenty of opportunity for questions. And I understand we have people online and they can hear me saying that. So if you have questions, do put them in the chat and I will dig them out from there. So over to you, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheila, and thank you everyone to be here. So we're just going to guide you through the summary of the findings of this report, which reviews the status of energy and decarbonization policies for road transport and focuses on zero-emission vehicles. So first, let me start showing the geographical coverage of the work. This is a map you can find in the report. So we have covered all G20 members, the 20 most populated countries in the world, the signatories of the Acceleration to Zero Coalition, some of the countries that have been supported by the GFEI, the Global Fuel Economy Initiative that Sheila was just talking about, and then also some other countries in the Global South that responded to a survey we sent at the beginning of this work. So the report refines the category of countries from one of the reports of the GFEI, the GFEI Zero Pathways report, which Pierpaolo co-authored. And so we refined it by looking into a set of other possible clustering criteria to facilitate this transition to zero-emission vehicles in the Global South. So the new variables that we considered are the vehicle market characteristics, vehicle manufacturing capacity, the role in the battery manufacturing and related supply chain, the carbon intensity in the electric mix, and the net balance of trade oil and petroleum products. So this is just an example of the country characterization based on the vehicle market size. And so the chapter in the report of the status of the ZEV policy action covers key policy areas. These are the 5 we have highlighted. So the enhancement of fuel economy for road transport vehicles, the progressive transition towards zero-emission vehicles and the deployment of charging infrastructure, the sustainable production, use, disposal, and recycling of EV batteries, and then finally the progressive transition towards low-carbon electricity production. And what we have done is ranking these policies into 5 categories. So the policies that have been ranked with dark green, it means that policies are in place, either in the format of a law or a mandate, and these are ambitious. A light green would mean that there are policies in place, but they don't cover enough. They are maybe insufficient compared to the ranking above. If they're ranking yellow, it means that there is a roadmap in place, but still some way to go to have a sound policy in place. If they're ranked in orange, it means that there is already an official statement saying that there is interest in developing some sort of roadmap or policy. And then finally, if they're ranked in red, it means that we haven't found anything. When we've done breast research, not even an official statement saying that this is something they will consider as a priority in the way forward. So if there is something clear, and you will see this in the graphs we're going to show you from now on, is that the results are very heterogeneous. In fuel economy, the advancements have been found in oil product exporting countries and also vehicle manufacturers. And interestingly, the group of oil and product exporting countries are also the ones that are lagging behind in ZEV policies. Then on low carbon electricity production, even though the starting point is very different in all countries, we see that this is one of the policies that is taken forward in almost all countries. And then finally, the battery manufacturing, supply chain sustainability, and end of life management is clearly the area with the greatest policy gap. And so I leave it over to Pierpaolo now.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, this is a summary, unreadable table that you find in the report. I would say it shows basically what we did in terms of trying to group different countries in the analytical assessment. What I want to flag is that indeed we try to look separately at manufacturers, non-manufacturers, high-income, low-income countries, and then countries that are self-sufficient when it comes to oil imports or countries that export. And the key differences that we found is that first you get more action, more policy action in the high-income countries, then greater action also amongst vehicle manufacturers. This is true for ZEV or fuel economy policies. When it comes to the difference between ZEV, zero-emission vehicles, and fuel economy, the key difference is that there are countries that essentially are oil importers and see clear benefits from a shift towards zero-emission vehicles and electrification. And so those are the ones that, despite not having taken action on fuel economy, are considering at least more action on zero-emission vehicles, which is an encouraging bit, I would say. One other key point is on the column on the right, where you see a lot of red and yellow, which is this column is about the sustainability of the supply chain of battery manufacturing. So this is an aspect that is not really on the radar of a lot of emerging economies in our view, given based on what we understand, thanks to the study. So that's an area that if we want to take seriously the transition to electric mobility, to zero-emission vehicles, in particular electric mobility, we really need stepping up in terms of taking action and also supporting countries that don't necessarily have the capacity to take action to do so. So that's a challenge, and it's going to be a key area of further work, I think, to make sure that we get the transition right. I think, yeah. One proposal we came up with based on this characterization is to look at who has already done something in each of, let's say, these four categories. So vehicle manufacturers, oil importers, non-vehicle manufacturers, oil importer, vehicle manufacturer, oil exporters, and non-vehicle manufacturers, oil exporters, and to try to understand if there are already some kind of countries which are in advance, so they've already taken actions, and others that didn't. And we think this pairing up these countries could be a way to help countries that are not yet into the mindset of having, like, accelerating policy action to take inspiration from others that have already done that. So that's one mapping that we think is possible, and what we have done with this report could help facilitating. More generally, before I get to the policy recommendations, I think a key narrative that we have, and it's worth being flagged here, is that we see a transition of high-income economies towards a greater alignment with sustainability. And we see a risk of a growing global divide between the high-income and low-income economies if we continue to focus the product development in high-income economies on products which are unfit for, like, the low-income, the affordability needed in low-income economies to transition. We see also opportunities for low-income economies to transition faster in order to foster their own development, industrial, economic, social. And so we try to make a case that flags that as the world is moving towards greater action for a number of reasons on sustainability, as the global north is moving, there is a real need to really help the global south catch up with what is happening, and then help everyone move collectively towards that sort of transition. The risk of not doing so is very significant. We think, when now I come to policy recommendations, we think that we know what are the policy tools that need to be rolled out to achieve this. We have done several years, not just us, but others, team, ICCT, many others have been analyzing this space of electromobility for a number of years. So we know what could be the solutions. It's very important to frame the ZEV transition for countries in the global south in a context that moves more generally their economies towards sustainability. There are benefits, net benefits, resulting in, for example, export opportunities coming from that. We should really nurture this. So we should come up with a developmental agenda, positive developmental agenda for emerging economies to embark on this change. Otherwise, they will not. Then we flagged the aspect of very high cost of capital in low and medium income countries, which is something that is paired with a call of greater spending from multilateral development banks for SDG and, in particular, ZEV-aligned investments. So we see this as one area where there's a need for greater action. So we elaborate on this in the report. this is part of what would help elaborating a value proposition that is compelling for low and medium income countries. So enabling them to see investments in this space and also then see economic development and development opportunities is in our view a key way to ensure that they can hop on the transition with like winning opportunities, and without that the transition will not happen. And then yeah, I flagged this before, we see big issues in terms of where the policy gap is when looking at the specific case of the sustainable battery supply chain, whether this is in terms of sourcing or in terms of second life or end of life management. So for example, economic circularity, recycling capabilities, it is something that is really not yet on the radar in many countries. The report makes it very clear, and that's something that we really need to take care of. We also look a little bit like in detail. I mean, we're building on other work done by UC Davis on this, on the specific case of second-hand vehicle trade. So colleagues at UNEP, colleagues at UC Davis have been working with UNEP on this, and this is also something we've been looking at for a number of years in GFEI. Second-hand vehicle trade is crucial for modernization of emerging economies. It's crucial for affordability. It has to be paired with better safety requirements and better environmental performance. And in particular, in the context of a major transition that could lead to global divide, this is also an instrument that should help making electric vehicles available at affordable cost in emerging economies. And as long as there is a capacity to then process these vehicles at the end of their life, otherwise we run into trouble. So then we flag these aspects. We also flag the opportunities that exist from transitioning faster, highly utilized fleets in the global south, because these are cases that can transition cost effectively already today and can actually make second-hand vehicles affordably available in these countries. There is one example I want to bring forward. I was recently in the Balkans, and if you've ever been to Tirana, there is a huge amount of electric taxis running around the city, which is very interesting. It's actually all private capital that deploy these taxis. This clearly shows that it is possible to accelerate the transition of highly utilized vehicles in emerging economies in a way that doesn't require magic instruments or enormous amounts of public resources to be fostering it. You can simply create the conditions for private capital to flow there, and there are economic cases that make then the vehicles available there. So the last point on the policy recommendation is we flag that the risk of like a successful transition to actually have to ensure that EVs can pay for the roads they use. And so we keep banging, let's say, on the road user charges and a transition to road user charges, which is something that is an ITF stronghold, and maybe comes from some extent from there in the past. I had there, but voila, then this is also one additional point. Final messages: we think this transition is inevitable. We see this growing divide. That's a problem. There are opportunities and threats in the global south. The divide being part of the threats, the opportunities exist to ensure that we can help everyone transition faster. We think it's important that we're starting to look at this in the context of the ZEV Transition Council, because the ZEV Transition Council has a capacity to really federate a lot of players in this space, and we hope we can continue to work on this and yeah, increase the capacity, the collective capacity of the ZEVTC to respond to some of the challenges that we flagged here. Voilà. Thanks then to everyone.
Thanks so much, Maria and Pierpaolo. And yeah, over to you, Tim, to tell us how the ZEV Transition Council might receive this important report and act upon it.
Thank you, Sheila. Pierpaolo gave a very nice transition to what I'll be speaking about here. But first, I wanted to just take the opportunity to thank the authors of the report, Maria and Pierpaolo, as well as FIA Foundation, for their leadership in getting this off the ground. I think it's really an excellent piece of work, and I'll be speaking a little bit about how it connects to other aspects that the ZEV Transition Council is taking forward and how we can build off this great work to implement some of the recommendations that are coming out of the work. But I first wanted to start with my ICCT hat on and just kind of follow up on some of the things that Pierpaolo was saying about policymaking. Recently, ICCT's done an update to our modeling work looking at what an ambitious yet feasible transition to ZEVs globally can produce and deliver in terms of the decarbonization of road transport. And we've been tracking policies that leading markets in Europe and North America have been making, and there has been a lot of progress. We've seen a lot, especially in the last 8 months, new light and heavy duty standards introduced in both the US. In Europe, a new ZEV mandate proposed for light duty vehicles in the UK, and a similar regulation in Canada, as well as massive new policies in California. So we're seeing really great progress in those leading markets, but even with all of those adopted and proposed policies, over time, we're seeing a stabilization of CO2 emissions through 2050. So it's better than seeing an increase as we were about 2 years ago before these policies were implemented. But I think the takeaway for us is that in order to put road transport on the track that we need it to be in order to align with the objectives in the Paris Climate Accord, we really need a global transition. And we don't have a lot of time to do that. So I think this report really hits on a lot of the key topics that exist in the policy landscape and the lack of policies in a lot of areas, and the need for moving forward quickly and how the international community can act in their role and capacity to help support that transition. So now transitioning, ICCT is also honored to serve as the Secretariat of the Zero Emission Vehicles Transition Council, which is a group of 17 governments from leading and largest vehicle markets around the world that was formed in 2020 to work together collectively to accelerate the transitions to zero emission vehicles. And since its inception in 2020, the ZEV-TC has included as one of its priority action areas work on the global transition to zero emission vehicles. Early on, it was the same recognition that this can't be a two-track transition, that it can't just be happening in leading markets. It really needs to be global efforts to transition to cleaner and zero emission options in order to meet our climate objectives, amongst many other priorities. So as part of the work that the ZEV-TC has done, last year, the TC formed what we call the International Assistance Task Force, or IAT, as Sheila referenced in her opening remarks. This is a collection of governments, philanthropies, multilateral development banks, research organizations, and others who have convened regularly to discuss how the international support offer can be better coordinated. And several working groups, again, Sheila referred to the working group that led the creation of this report, were formed to kind of map out the landscape of international assistance, both financial and technical assistance available to emerging markets, developing economies, and start to move forward in how that assistance can be better coordinated to be delivered more effectively. So I'm really happy that this is, I think, one of the key outcomes of that work that was launched last year. I think it's great to have kind of a key document that we can now refer to as we try to move forward with the future work through the IAT and other ZEV Transition Council work streams. So last year at the COP27, the ZEV-TC launched a new global commitment that was signed on by 8 members of the ZEV-TC. That was the next step in how that platform can be used to better coordinate the international support offer. Importantly, that new global commitment included a number of specific work areas that were launched to try to kind of take forward some of the ideas and actions that have been discussed in 2022 through the IAT convenings. I just want to highlight 2 of those here today and how this report specifically, I think, can really feed into and support what we're trying to do with these other initiatives. The first is what we call the ZEV Rapid Response Facility. This is a new mechanism that was launched to try to coordinate and provide technical assistance to countries that are at the early stages of the ZEV transition by bringing in requests from countries themselves about aspects of the ZEV transition that they're struggling with or could use support on, and matching those requests with a network of technical experts and implementing partners who can carry forward work. So we think this is filling a gap that we saw for providing very short-term kind of early stage projects that can be really important in moving the ball forward for many of the emerging markets, developing economies that we're working with and that have been featured in this report. So I think the report provides a lot of really useful information and recommendations that can be used to support the work of the Rapid Response Facility, have that platform, one, providing a lot of knowledge to support how that platform can be set up most effectively, and two, help to guide the types of projects that can come out of that specific facility. The second piece I wanted to feature was at the COP27, another global work package that was launched through the ZEBTC was the commitment to develop a global transition roadmap. So this is intended to be a high-level political document laying out how the international community can better work together to strengthen the support offer to emerging markets and developing economies. So this is something that the IAT is working on now, intended to launch at COP28 later this year. And I think that report will be well informed by the work of UC Davis. I think a lot of the ideas can be directly translated into that report and be used to really set the scene for how that international community can best move forward with that support offer. And the intention is to update that report each year, that roadmap each year, in order to have kind of a steady tracking of progress that the international community is making, that EMDs are making with policies and ZEV uptake. And really, I think something that we can use to hold the international community accountable. I think there's been a lot of great efforts to convene and set up these mechanisms, but I see this as an opportunity to for us collectively to put our money where our mouth is and make sure that these aren't just discussions, that we're leading to actionable work that's supporting transitions to ZEVs around the world. So yeah, I just wanted to close on two items from the report that I really personally connected to that I think was really unique and really appreciated. One was the clustering. I think the idea that there is no one size fits all approach is an important one. And I think that comes through clearly in this report, that we really need to tailor the different policy instruments that we have to the specific context of the countries where we're working in. And the second is on the policy instruments themselves. So again, kind of as Pierpaolo said, I think there is wide recognition of the set of tools and instruments that we have. And I think this report does a good job of laying that out and how we can be effective in deploying those tools moving forward. So with that, I'll thank you and turn it back to Sheila.
Thanks so much, Tim. And thank you, Maria and Pierpaolo, for the explanation of what's in the report. So we have some time now to take questions. There is a microphone. John has it at the back. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask? Great. This is great to see. So here first, and then the gentleman here. In the middle.
We were talking about the pictures of the report, and looking at the front page, I mean, you see a lot of cars and also a lot of cables. I don't know if there is, you know, a telecom or electricity grid. I don't know, probably a mixture. So have you assessed, you know, the availability of clean electricity? If there is a problem in the global south, do you think is solvable? Is a real challenge? I don't know if you have looked at this.
So we looked at, I'll take this.
So Pierpaolo is taking the question.
So we looked at what is the policy environment in terms of evolving towards low carbon electricity, and if there's a proactive environment or not. We haven't looked specifically at the aspects related to the grid capacity, or, I mean, what I can say is, from a high level perspective, the level of awareness and the level of action that you spot in emerging economies when it comes to opportunities related with decarbonizing electricity is higher with respect to what you see on things like transitioning the transport fleet. So I think we're ahead in terms of awareness on what needs to be done on the grid. Or what can be done on the grid, or willingness to actually do it, compared to what we see when it comes to transitioning the vehicles. I also want to say, I think there are cases and we haven't gone into details on these in the reports, but I think there are cases that can be structuring. So where like this example of the highly utilized fleets, think about buses. A bus guarantees electricity demand for 30 years, 20 years, at a significant power. It could be a structuring element to help advancing in terms of the quality of the grid. And it's something that pays for itself in many cases. So then I don't think there is necessarily like a disconnect between the need to transition the vehicles towards electric and also the need to make progress in the way we deliver electricity to the vehicles. I think there could be synergies, especially from these fleets. And yeah, that's to me, it's an encouraging sign. Then having said this, I will not claim to be an expert of grid capacity and the way it works in the global south. I'm sure there are challenges on that side.
Great. Anyone want to add anything? No? Anyone else looking happy? So there was a question at the corner here.
Thank you. I'm Till Bunsen from the ITF Secretariat, and my question is about one of the report's recommendation, which was about, I believe, decentralizing battery recycling. So ensuring that all world regions feature battery recycling capacity. And I think it struck me a little bit because I think it's very different from what we see from battery manufacturing. So this is very centralized in certain regions today. So there's a shift towards a more decentral battery production that I believe comes due to new trade barriers with industrial policies. I was just wondering whether you could elaborate a little bit why battery recycling would be more decentral than battery production if there's not economic opportunity to also centralize that, and also whether you see new industrial policies that affect international trade affecting the issue of battery recycling.
I take it?
Yeah, I can complement that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. On this is interesting because, well, my perspective is, if you talk in particular with a colleague, Rob de Jong at UNEP, one of the long timers of GFEI, one of the things Rob does when you talk about EVs in the global south, it shows you these photos of the Nissan Leafs piled up somewhere in Kenya and says, we need to be able to do something about this. Otherwise, we're going to have electric battery waste just dumped wherever in emerging economies. And that's something we don't want. And I agree with that. And so we need to have a strategy to deal with this. There is a risk that the type of vehicles you get in the global south are vehicles with batteries that are not very functional, that are no longer appealing in the global north. And so transitioning in a way that doesn't account for, like, it doesn't factor in a strategy to deal with that, I think it shows like an unsustainable path. So then based on that, the original idea was we need to have capacity to handle the batteries at the end of their useful life, wherever they end up. And some of the comments we received when we sent out the report for review were actually, well, maybe not. Maybe you need that only in clusters in order to achieve greater volumes, and so handle greater volumes and be able to like have a more viable business case for actually doing that. So then this is one of the things that we changed after review and then proposed for like some kind of degree of regional capacity to handle these rather than atomized, precisely for the point that you're bringing forward. So that you need a certain volume, otherwise the investment doesn't materialize. And the alternative to that is you have, I mean, if you believe that this is going to happen, you would have like these secondhand cars shipped back to the global north for the materials to be processed or dumped somewhere unsustainably in the global south. I think we do need a strategy for that.
Nothing to add, a lot of nodding going on. Great. Okay. Any more questions in that case? And I'm just looking at this computer to see if there are any there, which there aren't. Lou Fulton. Sorry, you're supposed to do that bit. Yeah. Microphone for Lou, please.
It's a little bit not friendly fire because it's not a fire shot. I was
It is
one of the
press-
reviewers and a little bit involved, but I really like the report, and I think it's a great example of some of the indicator tracking that you guys are doing now at a global level, and I think could be sort of the start of an ongoing sort of tracking of EV progress and ZEV progress around the world and some of the challenges. And based on a lunch conversation I had with Sheila, we were thinking about tracking characteristics of electric vehicles and the fact that some of them are pretty big. And it varies a lot by country. And so that would seem to me to be something that, you know, would be an interesting thing to also get into, is the characteristics of the vehicles, the battery capacities of these vehicles, and their draw on the global resource base, and how we might improve that. So that would be one idea of additional tracking, but I'd be curious what else you've all thought about as things that we should be paying attention to, you know, beyond what's in this report.
Try and mention something, maybe at the beginning.
Maria, why
Yeah.
don't you
You
go
take
first?
it first.
Okay,
And
let me
then
just start by saying that when we summarized the findings, we had to, of course, choose among the things we had shown in the report. So at the very beginning, you can see a little bit of setting the scene of per vehicles. So you see the breakdown there, and you do see how two-wheelers, three-wheelers take a portion, a great portion of what EVs mean in the global south. So this is really something we took care of. And also when we were monitoring the policies, we saw that in some cases, for example, trucks are not included in what the ZEV policy is incentivizing. So yes, this is definitely something that we could have worked more on, but it is, you do see something there. And now, yes, if you want to compliment, go ahead.
Okay, one thing I want to say, a couple of hours ago in this room, there was another media event on the Transport Data Commons initiative, which is all about improving our collective capacity to track information on transport. And so that, for example, is an idea, and it is of course, I think it would be good to track better information on the characteristics of EVs, and also in a way that makes it, that leverages basically existing data and brings them together under a single environment through a cooperative arrangement with different research institutions. So that would definitely be good to do. Sheila is also involved on that, and the FIA Foundation is also in the loop for that idea. But yeah, I think like better monitoring has to be part of what needs to be done. We haven't developed specifically a policy recommendation on that. Maybe we should have.
And Tim, I don't know if you have any thoughts. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, excellent question, Lou. I agree with Maria and Pierpaolo. I think the data is the big thing, making sure that data is available. And I think some of the efforts to try to coordinate across all of our different groups who are doing our own analysis and our own efforts to try to look at some of these things is important. So I think kind of making sure that data is available, that it's updated regularly. It's not something that should be launched and then fade away, right? If we really want to take this seriously, that should be a commitment to update that every year and make sure that we're using platforms like the ZEV-TC to elevate that information up to these other platforms where it really, I mean, in our experience, it's kind of getting this data in front of the right people can be extremely important. And I think once you have it, there's so many different uses for it that it starts with the data, it's important, and we need coordination.
Can I add one thing? There's one more thing that is coming to mind. I think on this data aspect, there is also a role for developed countries. Like, for example, we have in Europe a data set that tracks every vehicle and the maintenance of the vehicle. And when the vehicle is traded cross-nationally, there is a possibility to pass on that information to the country receiving the vehicle from the country exporting the vehicle. This exists within EU 27 countries. It doesn't exist between the EU and the Balkans, for example. While a lot of vehicles end up from Central Europe to the Balkans, it would be kind of not so difficult to enable countries in the Balkans to have access to the information on those vehicles being exported to make sure that what comes in is clean and roadworthy and has been properly maintained. But at the moment, this is not something we are already doing. So there are things like this that could basically, there's a whole aspect of the second-hand vehicle trade, which is related to what we export. So I think the data tracking could also leverage that, like us doing a better job on the exporting side and maintaining proper information about that sort of stuff.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're at the end of our time. So unless there's any more pressing questions, we'll draw this to a close. I have to say massive thank you to the report authors and to Tim for coming along and explaining to us all how it's going to impact on the politicians who are taking this forward. From the Foundation's point of view, you are quite right. We are actively involved in the data initiative because to us, evidence is all, and evidence from GFEI, a project we've run for many years, which identified one of the issues that we're talking about, Lou, which is vehicles getting a lot bigger, which is something we all have to keep an eye on. That evidence is a strong part of this. So we go forward prepared to do what more is needed to help ensure the transition is equitable and fair, and that we take a global view. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming, and thank you again to our authors and our panel. Yeah, of course. Have you all got one? Yeah.